And for more on those rising prices and a potential recession, well, it could affect President Biden. Joining us now is Greg Valliere, AGF Investments Chief U.S. Policy Strategist. Greg, we thank you as always. What can the president really do here? I mean, the market, the Federal Reserve, potentially looking at a recession. Is the Biden administration on the same page? And if yes, what can they really do?
He can do a few things, but they all have downside risks, unfortunately for him. I mean, he can go to Saudi Arabia and beg for oil, but that might anger environmentalists. He can beat up on oil companies and companies in general, but that would sour his relations with companies. He can express some displeasure at the Fed, but I think that would be a mistake as well. So he's in a tough spot. I don't see any panacea, any easy, quick fix.
Greg, we were just hearing about some of the things that could potentially be done, though. The Jones Act maybe potentially having a significant impact in terms of the ability of foreign shippers to be able to move crude around. Maybe we do see some sort of a windfall tax that would allow potentially a tax holiday for US drivers. Are there practical things that the president could do and isn't?
Yes, I agree, Guy. But at the same time, there are downside risks. Let's take a windfall profits tax, for example, which progressive Democrats are getting very excited about today. If this showed some signs of life, I think there would be a blowback by the Republicans. Every one of the 50 Republicans in the Senate would vote against it. And there would be some Democrats like Joe Manchin of West Virginia who would vote against it as well.
I want to go back to the oil story because it's not just oil prices that are rising, it's food prices as well. It's something that I don't think I've heard any commentary when it comes to the Biden administration. Is there anything on the food front that the Biden administration can do here?
I'm not aware of anything that's imminent that he could do. No, I think that's going to be very cyclical, very difficult. You know, one other part of this story that you can't overlook, and that's Ukraine. I think as long as the war persists in Ukraine, we're going to have problems with food prices, with energy, with raw materials, with fertilizer. I think that's a big part of this story.
Greg, what does this mean politically? You've been telling us for a long time that the House is gone, the Senate probably is gone as well. That leaves President Biden with 2 more years with a hostile Congress. What can he do with those 2 years? And do you think he's done after 2 years?
Yes, I do. I've been pretty outspoken. I may be proved wrong, but I think we're in a situation now where if the Democrats get really, annihilated on the November 8th election, which looks quite likely, I think that maybe Thanksgiving, Christmas time, Joe Biden will make it clear that he's not going to seek re-election. I point out to everyone that if he won a second term, he would be leaving the White House at the age of 86. I think that's too old. I think not only Republicans, but increasingly Democrats as well are thinking that Biden will be a one-term president.
A one-term president, what does that do in the near term, the midterm elections, for example?
Well, his agenda is in trouble, needless to say. I don't think he has much hope to get anything more done on Build Back Better. I think there's a mood right now against spending. There's a mood right now against any new tax increases. So I think for investors in our industry, that's not a bad scenario. We're not going to get a capital gains tax. We're not going to get an estate tax. No change in the step-up basis. There are a lot of things that advisors, investment advisors, were worried about. I don't think they're going to happen now.
Greg, if he is a one-term president, can he do more in the last 2 years than he's done in the first 2 years? What does that free him up to do? Or do you think he's going to have his hands so tied by the economy and by Congress?
He'll have his hands tied by House Speaker Kevin McCarthy, who will probably want to have a hearing a week on Hunter Biden and various alleged transgressions. It's going to make it tough for Biden to get a lot done with the Republican House. Biden can do a lot on geopolitics, and I think he will. That's a tradition in the U.S. But I think in terms of any new economic initiatives, it's going to be really difficult for him.
Greg, let's talk a little bit more about the economy here because we're also dealing with geopolitics in the background. Trade, for example, tariff negotiations leading perhaps to that inflation story. Can you talk a little bit about the China of it all?
Yeah, that's an intriguing angle. I think that you could see some tariffs lifted. There's a fight within the administration right now. The New York Times had a good piece on this yesterday, between people who feel that tariffs should be lifted and others who say no. It's a political risk, though, for Biden. If he were to lift tariffs on China before the election, would he be criticized as being in bed with China? Would Hunter Biden get into the narrative? So it does have its downside risk, but I think in general, tariffs could be lifted on other countries. At the margin, it would have some positive impact on inflation. Not a lot, but maybe a few tenths of a percent.